Hi guys, so welcome to the podcast today where I'm going to ask Craig some questions on his journey into sort of training, how it all evolved. So the video last week was with Dan, his friend, sort of explaining about Craig's journey and how he helped him develop, but let's hear it from Craig now exactly how he got into it. I know I've done previous videos on this, but it's nice to just sit down and get a first-hand feel for how he did it. So Craig, over to you. So obviously 15 years old. Went to a gym, did you? Is that the first experience?
No. I would just all I was doing was I've been doing a lot of martial arts, so massively into Bruce Lee.
Right. Okay.
So that was the main for me. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be like him. But I did a little bit of weights around 15 because my brother was training.
Right.
So. I started doing a little bit like in a garage and things like that, and he used to have a couple of muscle magazines sort of lying around the house because he was into it. He loved sort of Arnold and Mentor and people like that, but I never really was that interested because it was all Bruce Lee for me at that time, Chuck Norris, people like that. But I started doing a little bit and started quite enjoying it, the feel of it, and obviously even at 15 I started getting a little bit of biceps, and so I quite liked that. Not that I've always been sort of I've never sort of shown it off, but just for me, it made me feel better because I was always very, very skinny, so I always felt a little bit the guy in the corner that no one noticed, if you know what I mean. I didn't want people to notice me because I was thin, and so it helped a bit with that. And then the only thing I can remember is the biggest sort of switch, which I know I've said before, people know, but my auntie came over from America and I was too young, but she took me to see Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and she got me in at the cinema. And I just remember the first scene when he was walking down the hill with a log over his shoulder, and something just clicked in my head, and I just thought, man, that's how people should look. So it kind of just, the martial arts kind of dropped a little bit and the weight started a little bit more, and then I started heavily looking. I mean, it's not like now where people can click a button and find out anything they want. So I started looking in these old muscle magazines that my brother had, and then I started buying muscle magazines where it was possible. And just, I don't know, it kind of just, like I say, it clicked, and I just thought, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to look. And it gave me a little bit more confidence to be a little bit bigger, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I just felt a little bit more, I don't know, the only word is confidence. I just felt a little bit more like I could walk into a room and not feel as, and that was it really. And then, but I had no intentions of competing at first. All I wanted to do was just lift and see what I could do. And then I got to I'd obviously started working and things from school, and then I got to about 17 and seen in some magazines that people were competing and things like that. And but obviously I was training in a garage where most people were training in a gym. And then I saw Ian Harrison were one of the first ones, because Ian's just a little bit older than me, and he'd kind of come from nowhere, and suddenly people was saying, wow, this kid can be, and I just thought, without sounding arrogance in any way, I just thought, well, if he can do it, why can't I? Because it's kind of how you got to think a little bit. So I started doing it a little bit more seriously at that point. But I'd started working with my brother at British Steel, and it was a very heavy job in the sense of that you were lifting sort of all day. So I was basically, at that time, I was obsessed with Arnold and people like that. So I was literally getting up in the morning and doing a little bit of training in the garage, going and lifting all day at work, and coming home and lifting at night. So that was my life. I never saw anybody. That's all I did. And I got a bit of progression, but it felt too much. I was kind of just thinking, there's no way I can keep this up. I never had a big appetite, so I started knowing that I had to eat more food. So again, that became more difficult when I was at work. It was like, well, I can't break off. What am I going to do here? So And all I kept thinking was there has to be a better way than this. So I just started experimenting with things in the garage. I'd read a little bits on Mike Menzer and people like that, but it had never really sunk in because this was before. So just logically I thought, well, I don't know, maybe if I push a little bit harder, can I do a little bit less? Because obviously on the times I did push harder, I tired a lot quicker. So I thought, well, can't do 2 hours now because I'm absolutely ruined. So I just started playing around with things, and the workouts got shorter and shorter and shorter, but my improvements got quicker and quicker and quicker. Yeah. So I just started adjusting food the best I could then. I didn't have a great deal of money, and don't get me wrong, my mum and dad were fantastic, so they helped me as they always did with anything. So I actually got to a point that I decided I was going to compete when I was 18. I picked the show, picked the time, and nothing massively changed. Like people now, obviously they'd be like, right, I've got 12 weeks. Nothing changed that much because my training stayed the same. My nutrition knowledge was zero, apart from what Arnold did and people like that. Yeah. So again, but I was playing around with things. You know, did this make me feel bloated? Did I? So all I kind of did was I started implementing some cardiovascular work. So I swam twice a week, which I loved, and I can even remember the exact routine. I used to walk to Rothwell swimming baths, which was about, I don't know, maybe about 2 or 3 miles, probably about 3 miles, and I used to, and it was a proper workout as such. I didn't go and just swim. Yeah. I got in the pool and I would do 2 lengths of every stroke, right, finishing with the butterfly, which used to knacker me.
Save the best till last.
And then I would wait until my breath had recovered, and I got to a point that I could do 2 full lengths underwater, which used to just absolutely finish me off. The lifeguard used to come nearly every single time and go, "Are you all right?" So, you know, if anybody got in my way in the end. So that was cardio twice a week, and what I loved to do, because I did it all through the martial arts thing, was I used to love to skip. So at the end of every one of my training sessions, I would skip for only about 10 minutes, but you know, just at a nice pace, a bit of a sweat on at the end of the workout. So I did that, and I trained 4 days a week. So the swimming was on days I didn't train, so I was doing something 6 days a week, and the skipping was at the end of each of the weight workouts. And that really started to bring me in shape, just because of, I was very skinny to start with, so metabolism was revving. I was 18, so obviously this cardiovascular work on top of the weights I was doing anyway, and little adjustments to my diet. You know, I thought, you read things, so hang on, maybe cut fruit down highly, and you know, and obviously then with the sugar, so I started to get in a bit better shape. I didn't eat a great deal back then of red meats and things. I ate things like chicken. My mum and dad used to buy me a whole chicken, so I'd split that into 2 meals. So, but I did have a lot of eggs, so I was having a lot of egg yolk, so that's kind of where my fat came from. But other than the eggs, I probably had very little fat. So again, I was getting in better and better shape because of that. And the weight training, which I know people will find insane, but the weight training then I'd brought down to a point that all I did was 1 repetition per set. So, but before everybody goes, well, hang on, so I maybe did, remembering rightly, I probably did something like a maximum of 3 movements on a big body part and maybe 2 on a small. But when I say a repetition, the repetition took 1 minute. So I would lower the weight, I would lift the weight for 30 seconds, which, unless anybody's done that, is very hard to do at that speed. Squeeze and things, you know, if it were a peak contracted movement for a few seconds, and then I would lower the weight for 30 seconds. So, and it was failure because I couldn't do another rep like that. So that was basically the work. But initially, I did each body part twice a week. So there would be half my body on one day, the other half on another, and I would take a day off, go do the swimming thing. Then I would come back and do it again, go do the swimming thing, and Sunday was completely off. That changed over time to it being the 4 days and everything being worked once over the 4 days, because the recovery just it just stopped at some point. It just became way too much, and I got better at doing it. So as I got more intense doing it, I had to take it back. But I also I cut the volume back further. So I still stuck with 2 movements on most things, but that became on big body parts as well. But what I did then was I actually started, at times, this was not all the time, but I started with a negative, which would take 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Then I would do a positive for 30 seconds, and I would finish with a 30-second negative. So you've got to imagine, at first it lowered my poundages, but I wasn't bothered about that, because again, you catch that back up anyway. But that gave me another negative, which is stronger on.
Yeah.
So then the stress was further. So then I needed more rest because of that. So that's that's walked me into the show. You know, before I even did the extra negative, the 1 minute rep was what carried me into my first bodybuilding show, which was the most frightening experience ever of my entire life.
Was that like it is today then, when you stood on stage in a thong, basically? And
not a thong.
Not a thong,
because that won't be happening. But I had never been to a bodybuilding competition. I'd never been to a bodybuilding gym. All I had a Mr. Olympia video that my dad bought me, and I was very fortunate that Lee Labrada and people like that was on there, and all I did was pose, watch what they did, practiced poses, kind of looked in the mirror to see, does that suit me? Do I look horrendous in that? And then my brother had a friend that was really good at mixing music and things, and he did me some music that I wanted, and I did. I had the music from Conan the Destroyer, which was Arnold's second Conan, and what I did was I kind of got the poses that I wanted. I got them how I wanted them to be. And then I listened to that music, and what he did was he cut bits for me to the points that if I was, say, doing what I'd have called maybe a very classical pose, the music kind of went up a bit, and if it was kind of more of a muscular, it'd be more dramatic and come down. So it worked really well.
Oh, good.
But I got to the show and I nearly didn't do it. Yeah, I was terrified.
Too nervous.
I just sat there with my brother. My family arrived a little bit later. And I was just terrified, and I just kept seeing the people that I was competing against, and one kid looked massive, and I just thought, what am I doing here? This is it. All my confidence went, which can actually, as people know that compete, can totally ruin your condition and everything anyway. And I'm not sitting here and saying I was ripped to the bone, you know, I didn't have striations in my backside and all that stuff, but I was in really good shape because I'd suffered. I'd made sure because I knew I had to get to look, because I want a big kid, but having said that, you know, when I left school I was 7 stone. When I walked on stage in that show, I was 12 stone 2, they weighed me in at.
Right.
So it was quite an increase, but you know, there were some big kids, and one kid, like I said, looked huge, and I just remember saying to my brother, I can't do it. I cannot do it. I'm gonna have to go home. And my brother was like, "You've no chance. You know, you've put my mum and dad through hell. You've got to do it. They're on the way. There's no." So I think I've told this story before, and I'll never forget it. That's the only reason I bring it up, is because we went backstage, and I sat down, and I was still in my head, I can't do this. And people had started warming up and pumping up, and I was and oiling up, and I'm sat there thinking, and my brother's like, we need to get started, you know, and I can't, you know, I'm just thinking, I can't, what am I going to do? So, and I'm sure I've told you this story before, I think we've done it on here. A guy came over to me, an old guy that was there backstage, telling people where to go, and he got down on one knee in front of me, and he just said, are you nervous, kid? And I just said, I don't think I can do it. And he said, I'm going to give you a little piece of advice, and I want you to remember it all the way through. And it is the best piece of advice I've probably ever been given to do with bodybuilding, as in competing. And he literally just said to me, now whether he said it just so I did it, but what he said to me was, he just said, I guarantee what's bothering you is the size that everybody looks. And I went, yeah. And he just said, when you go to any bodybuilding show, he says, particularly on these types of levels, he said there'll always be a kid backstage, especially juniors like you, because it was between 18 up to like 21. Right. So there were older kids as well. So obviously I'm looking at them. Some's got beards, and oh my god, you know. So
yeah.
And he just sat and he just said to me, he just said, there'll always be a kid that looks like they've got no face and don't even massively look like they train. And he went, today that's you. And I thought, right. And he went, but that's the one that they should be worried about, because that's the one who's in shape and he's ready to go. And he says, and I don't see that with anybody else. Right. So, like I say, he might have just been blowing smoke up me. But I just thought, you know what? I've done all I could. That was the one thing I always tried to do, even at the beginning. If I've done everything I possibly can, even if I come last, I can't go home and go, do you know what, if I'd have done that, or because I'd done it. So I just thought, I have to, someone's got to start somewhere. So even if I come dead last, you know, I've got to explain that to my mum and dad, because half at World were coming just in case from family. And I just thought, I've got to do it. So I started pumping up. I got stripped off. And everybody looked at me a little bit, you know, kind of, and my brother's going, what's going on, everybody, you know. Yeah. And I just walked up to this mirror, and this kid came up and stood at this. And right quickly, I'll just go back to the lad that looked huge. Genuinely, if my brother were here, he'd tell you he took 3 jumpers off and 3 pairs of jogging bottoms, and there were nothing left of him. So he were gone, he were done. That didn't bother me anymore.
Right.
He must have just thought, I'll outdo everybody beforehand.
He's going to get found out eventually, because he's got to get on stage.
Yeah, because if he'd have been shredded or something, you'd have gone, oh, well, okay, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not saying all bad about the kid, I didn't know him, and I walked in front of this mirror, and the kid that I'd kind of noticed that I thought, man, he's good, you know, compared to the, and they were all good, but I just thought, man, that's what I would say. Yeah. He come up and stood at side of me, and we both hit a couple of poses. And he just couldn't stop looking at me, and I looked at him, and I was at the side of him, and I thought, you know what, I'm alright. And it kind of just took that. But then when we got to the side of the stage curtain, I'd gone again, my heart was like, oh, Jesus Christ. And then we came out, we were called out. And I just remember the stood us in a line, and obviously, you know, you could hear your family to a degree. And I got first call out, so there were me and a couple of other kids stood at the front. And as soon as I kind of just hit the first pose, there was just this noise. Yeah. And I don't say it were for me, but what I mean is there was just this noise, and I could hear my family, and kind of the nerves just, I know it sounds probably, but I just got this click of, you know what, Craig, this is like a job. Hit these bloody poses properly, because I just thought, I can't have gone through all that to now waste this. Yeah. So I just thought, and nerves kind of went at that point, because all I focused on was listen to the guy, hit the poses properly, and move on. Yeah. So I did that, came off, and this was a come off, straight back on my first show. This wasn't a come back on later tonight if you're lucky enough to do so. So we all came on and did posing routines. So I did this routine with the music. And all I can remember is I was hitting poses, and it sounded quite loud, you know, the crowd. Yeah. Which it had for most, don't get me wrong, but it just sounded quite loud. So again, I was feeling pretty good. I don't mean thinking, oh, I've won this, but it was like, the nerves kind of gone, so I'm hitting these poses. Yeah. And when the music stopped, everybody stood up, and everybody was stomping their feet, and I thought, and by then you see you go other way, then you're just like, whoa, this is it. So I just started it in a few more poses, and everything was timed. Yeah. So at this point he went, thanks, Craig. And I just didn't care, I didn't hear him, so I kept sitting there, and he went, thank you, Craig. And eventually I walked to the curtain, and I just remembered Arnold on a video hitting poses at curtain, and I stood at curtain, and in the end he just went, thank you, please go. So I went off. We all came back on, and I was just very fortunate I won that show, and I got best poser and best most muscular, and because they give all the prizes out at that time. So that was just amazing to have done that I remember the interview after he interviewed me with a thing, and I don't know why I said it, but it became my second show. The guy that when I did the British, then the second show, he brought it up. I was fortunate to win that one, and he brought that up, and he just because he asked me, he says, "You train? This is ridiculous. You train in your mum's garage," and I went, "I do, yeah." And he just went, and I don't know why I said it, but he just said, "What do you do with car?" And I just went, "I just lift it up and down a couple of times a day." But he brought that up, at the next show, so I always remember that. But yeah, and that's kind of. Obviously, when you get a win or two under your belt, then confidence. It's like, right, I need to carry on with this and see what I can do.
Proof in your training regime as well, because leading up to that,
I didn't think that at the time. Obviously, because I'm training in a garage, I had no clue. I maybe thought everybody else were doing that. At that point,
the one rep.
Yeah, because I just didn't know.
Yeah. I think it just proves though, if you want it enough, what you're doing, you just wanted it enough, so you were training in a garage, no problem. I'll make it work.
Yeah.
Probably if you've had no way,
it's just what you've got to do.
Done something
it's just what you've got to do.
Make it where you've got that click in your mind. So,
yeah.
Going back then, you said you met Ian Harrison. What were the?
I didn't meet him at that time. I met him quite a bit later on. I was probably about. Ian, when I met Ian, he was probably pro. He'd probably just won and turned pro.
Did he give you any advice then? What were his sort of first?
No, because we didn't sort of talk like that really.
No.
We had a couple of little chats here and there, which probably Ian, I'm sure, won't remember, but more at shows, because you kind of met people at shows then. You didn't really see people, unless later on Ian opened his own gym, so I ended up training there for a while, so I saw him more frequently then. But you kind of just knew people in your... because when I hit about 19, 20 after the British and stuff, I kind of made a decision... I went to America for the first time at that point and stayed there, trained there, came home, and before I went back, I made a decision. I need to go to a gym. You know what I mean? I need to have that equipment and atmospheres and see what it's like. So I went and started training at a gym just before I went back to the States for the more long-term time that I stayed there. And you kind of just get to know people within that gym, and people were competing from that gym. And everybody thought I was nuts, because the training I was doing then, I'd moved on from the one rep, but I was... Obviously Dorian Yates was Mr. Olympia then, so that was a heavy influence. And I trained too much. I tried to probably copy his routine. And things for... If I did 4 all-out sets on back, which I know people will find humorous of, well, how can that be? But I was always in a fatigued state. I was always kind of, Jesus Christ, I've got to go to the gym, train. And that's never a good place to be, because you're not recovering. I did that for a long time, and I still progressed. I was force feeding like crazy and all those things, and I still progressed. But if I could go back, I'd know a lot more now too. So.
But you did win your first competition that you entered, so
but I probably ended up, by the time I'd got to this gym, I was probably doing more. I don't necessarily mean a lot more volume as such, but I was training to failure, and then I was getting forced reps off my brother, and I was kind of doing odd negatives, and your body can't tolerate that very much. It really can't. But I knew the basis of it, because I was thinking, I'm knackered here, this can't be right. And then I started reading more about Arthur Jones and people like that, and Mensa, and realised that, wow, this isn't just me that does this. This has been here before. So last thing I want is anybody to come on and go, well, he thinks he invented, because I know I didn't. But I was doing a form of that before I knew anything about it. But obviously then by reading Mensa and things, you get a bit more insight into it, which can help. And it just kind of evolved from there. I started to realise this fatigue thing can't be right, and I stopped caring then because as daft as it sounds, I probably still, particularly when you go to a gym and you're seeing people training for hours and they're big, and you tend to think, am I right though? Shall I try this other movement? Let's add it on, and that can be a bad thing. But I got to a point that I just thought, I can't do this. I can't keep up with. I'm going to have to cut back, or something's going to go wrong. You know what I mean? So I just kind of had to get to a point where I think, right, forget what everybody else is doing. even though I were doing less, but even just think, let's just do what I feel I can do and take it from there. And that's kind of what I started doing at that point, you know.
So as you started training like that, obviously one set to failure. I'm going through that now, and I still don't even think I have done, you know, when we say I haven't done a set to failure.
You have.
And I kind of have, but I think there is probably a level of intensity I could maybe...
You get better at it, because it's not just the intensity, but you get better at getting your brain into the muscle you're trying to work, and those. I know people say you don't, but you do. You know, I could not hold anything and sit in concentration curl and focus that much that I can feel blood going into my biceps. So that tells you immediately, well, then you have got a mind to. So you just get better, but as you get better, then you have to do less.
Yeah.
That's where people go wrong. They think, well, I've stopped now. And to quickly, I know I'm diversifying a bit here, but to quickly put that in for people's brain, how my brain worked was, when I became fatigued after so many weeks of doing that, I started to realise, particularly reading things like Men's who backed that up, that I had to cut back further or extend the rest. Now, what most people tend to do is they will add. That stops working, I'll add. But if you just think about it logically, which is what came to me, was if I started a routine and in, say, 6th week, I'm absolutely knackered. That's most people. Most people don't get to, if they're training hard, you don't get to, say, the 6th, 8th week and you feel great like you did at the start, which is why you're reasoning, why do I need to change this? So you're not knackered because you're not doing enough. How can you add and suddenly feel like you did at the start? So I know people say do deloads and then you're ready to go again and things like that. But your body's letting you know that, you know, if you start out with a 13-inch arm and it's now 16, if you think about that logically, the demand from that arm to recover on your overall system has got to be greater than the 13-inch. And if that's from your head to your toe from every body part, you know, so you can't do more. How are you going to add? It just don't make any sense when you look at it logically. So I used to just cut back, and I didn't care what people thought. And like I said, there were periods of time when, you know, I'm not going to name names, but people would walk up to me and just go, "You're nuts, you're going to die doing a set like that." Or they'd go, "But also, you didn't gym for 10 minutes, you're wasting your time, no, what's going to happen?" But you know, when you come round 18 months later and you're 5 stone heavy or something without drugs, which I know people go, "Bullshit, let them." Then it's like, wow, what are you doing? Or then it is, what drugs are Craig on? Because he's on a load of something, because that's just not happened over. And that's what, you know, I just didn't care.
Was that more a compliment though? Because you thought, I've actually worked hard for this. You can think what you want.
Yeah, and no, at first you kind of think, you cheeky get. You know, I'm dying, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to eat this, and, you know, and my whole life is this. But yeah, then on the other hand, I suppose you can then, like, you know, my wife used to say, or my then girlfriend, now wife, used to kind of say, yeah, but they're noticing, aren't they? So that's obviously saying, you know, so yeah, I suppose in another way it is a compliment in that sense. Yeah.
So doing the 1 sets to failure, do you remember a point when you maybe did do that 1 set to failure and you were like, wow, I've really nailed
it? For the first time?
For the first time. When were the first time?
Oh, wow.
I'll give you my example. So we did ball squats in the gym not long since on my 3-month transformation, link below. And I swear to God, I've never felt like that before. Like for the whole week, I was aching, but afterwards the pump.
Bit like Sissy's last week.
Bit like Sissy's last week. Yeah. Still aching now. Got to see, but that ball squat for me, and it was the drop set one.
It's quite a while ago, so to say the exact moment, but obviously I felt something like that just in the garage when I started even doing that 1 repetition, because. Like I say, if people have never done that, you know, we'll probably do that. It's unbelievably hard, is that. People will take that in, it's 1 rep. You try lifting a weight that's as heavy as you can go in form, that by the time you get to the top of that 30 seconds, you couldn't do another push. And then you've got to lower it as hard as you can and fight down for 30 seconds. It's rough, and the pain is unbelievable, you know. You do a leg extension or something like that, and you'd probably rather be, you know, somebody poke you in the eye than go through what's going on. But so probably then. But then, I mean, there were times that sort of around that time when I started then doing like more positive reps to a set of failure, say 15 reps or something. I can remember those times when, you know, I would lock off and just think, Jesus Christ, there were many a time I walked in a gym, as Danny may have said on that, I don't know, because I didn't get involved with that, stayed away from it, but there were many a times I could go in a gym and do an all-out deadlift, and I were done.
Yeah.
I may have gone and done something else to finish off, I might have done a pullover or something, but I was done. You know what I mean? It was literally, geez, man, I need to go home, and people would be, really? And it was like, but when you've put your heart and soul into that, the amount of people that say they're trained to failure, that don't, is beyond belief. Do you know what I mean? It's but you truly hit a set to failure, and you will not want to do anything else. You just won't. You know. I mean, we've been training in my sister's garage recently, and I went this morning and done something I've not done in years, and I did a sissy squat, I did a standing cable row, and I did a flat bench to failure, reps, whatever on each. It was just too much for me. Do you know what I mean now? Yeah. I literally, I did everything I could, but by the time I'd finished, my hands were like this. I struggled to drive home. I felt sick. My head was... you know, when I've done the sissy, as people's maybe seen on here, I'm done. You know what I mean? I'm done. I need to rest me then and come back, you know, at a later date for something else. Because there's a big difference in thinking you're going to failure, and I don't want people to go, oh, you arrogant bastard that you think you, but I'll try to give everything I have every time, no matter what, because if I don't, I hate myself more than any other person could ever hate me. So, you know, my brother would tell you if he was here, there were times I would go home from that first gym and I'd just go home and eat some crisps because I was fucked off, excuse my French, that I thought there were another rep in tank. And he would go, you know, you've been sick, you've bled, what is wrong with you? And now some people would say to me, that's probably a really good trait because it were never enough. Keep going, but on the other hand, it can be really crap because you then try to do more and more, and you can train too hard. People say you can. You know, you do a set, fail your 4 steps, negs, partials, till weight literally drops out of your hand or whatever. It's too much because, as I've said before, all your resources are going to be used up in you just getting over that workout, not, well, hang on, we've got a bit left, let's put a bit of muscle on for what he's done, you know. So, but I can remember those, but it still feels like new now sometimes when your head's pounding. And
but
know.
Afterwards it feels good, doesn't it? I know
many days later.
Many days later, but
you
feel sick and you feel like, but you actually think
you feel accomplished. You know you've done something.
Just gone
you know the body has to respond as long as you're taking care of the other processes at that point.
So at what point then did nutrition become very important? I think you said at the start you were doing the bodybuilding competition and you were doing sort of
the best
nutrition, but your knowledge wasn't.
I just kept reading, constantly reading, because it's like I say, it's not like now you can click a button and it's there.
But there is
on the other hand, on the other hand, now there's way too much information. Everybody's an expert. So back then there was limited information, but it was probably better because you know, if someone had wrote a book, they'd usually got a little bit of knowledge to be able to write that book. So I just kept reading and reading. I read Mensa all the time, and kind of realised the importance of, unlike they didn't do that in Arnold's day necessarily, but the importance of carbohydrates, which is always a massive topic now. Do you need carbs? You know, for a high intensity muscular contraction, you have to have glycogen, or there's nothing there. Now water and glycogen bond, so you need certain amounts of glycogen, certain amounts of fluid. So I started to then look at what are the best sources of carbohydrates to ensure I can get through these workouts. And also there's a sparing effect with carbohydrates. So if you're eating some carbohydrates, then the protein can be used for what it's required to use for repair. So now people will argue the fact that you can, you know, there's, again, I try to keep it simple, and that's not because people don't have the knowledge, but just why complicate it? So we can talk about gluconeogenesis, where protein can be converted to a form of energy, use of carbohydrate. But why would you do that when you can just eat carbohydrate?
Yeah.
You know, it's not the devil. It's not going to make you fat necessarily. The only reason carbs will make you fat is if you're eating, you know, high sugars a lot of the time, and you're doing it way beyond your calorie needs. That's more the important factor. So, as I said, I never had a huge appetite, so for me it was force feeding to get bigger. And again, people will say, well, you don't need to do that. For me to get the size I wanted to get to, I could not get the nutrition in to ensure the recovery was happening as well. So I just kept learning and learning and learning until I got to a point that I had as much knowledge as I could to do as good as I could, and I just kept learning. You're still learning now, you know, you're still looking at recent studies, but I always take studies with a pinch of salt. And again, that's not to say that they don't have merit and they don't have, but 99% of studies are not done on someone that's been training for quite a while and are putting that level of effort in. You know, it's like the intensity studies that they do, where they always come out with, well, you know, you need more volume, even with the intensity. Well, you ain't training for failure then, because you can't do more volume. This is the point. You can't. No one is walking into a gym, right? I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's an alien from outer space. No one is walking into a gym and doing 10 sets all out muscular failure. They're not, because there'll be an ambulance waiting at the door. You know what I mean? Particularly if they were trying to do it on a regular basis. So, you know, you've got to understand that in these studies, when someone fails, they're probably failing mentally. And again, I'm not having a go, but if they've never trained before, which is what most studies are, how much intensity are they actually bringing to the workout? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, of course they need more volume, but if you're at a point of doing a set like Tom Platz did or something, how much volume can you really do? You know, and then you've got to look at the recovery side and all those factors, you know, beyond that.
Okay then, well, hope that gave you a bit of an insight into Craig, and, you know, comment below, we'll get back to you. Any questions?
Can go further if people want to know beyond that point.
Go even further.
So when I got super heavy and blah, just let us know and we can definitely do that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thanks guys for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.